I'm going to start by doing something that's going to cause me a lot of pain back home in Pittsburgh, and that's to sing the praises of Cleveland. Uh, the reason that Cleveland and Pittsburgh enjoy such a rivalry, whether you're looking at sports, industry, or culture, is that they're so similar. And in many ways, it's a city version of a sibling rivalry. Each city lays claim to being the captain of industry that didn't just build the country, but the world. Each city is a place where you arrived with nothing but your name and your work ethic, and you made a life for yourself. And that's been the story of the Rockefellers and the Firestones and the Timkins here in Cleveland. It's also been the story of the Carnegies, Fricks, and Mellons in Pittsburgh. Now, this region has an awful lot of things going for it. It's got a thriving energy industry, hardworking people, a resurrected manufacturing base, natural beauty, and inexpensive living. But elites love to look down on us, and they try to cast us into something that we simply don't want to be or simply can't be, which is the next Boston, San Francisco, or whatever other shiny new place is deemed desirable. And this great region, it's always been a battleground where ideological war has been waged between, on one side, the creators and the doers, on the other side, the second-handers and the collectivists. That war continues today, and that's a big motivator for me speaking today. So what I'm going to do throughout the next couple of minutes is for each section that we're going to discuss, I wanted to pull a quote out from Rand. And I had the chance this past winter to read through her letters chronologically. And if you haven't done that, I encourage you to do so. There are some awesome gems out there. And I'm going to start with one from the mid-40s, which is the best brains of mankind carry the rest. I've been fortunate enough to spend my career in the most amazing industry out there, which is the natural gas industry. And we are in the midst of an epic generational opportunity for not just the nation and this region, but also the world when it comes to natural gas. All of it comes from disruptive technology. And it comes from ideas and technology that are brought to us by creators and achievers and innovators. So when you hear that tagline that you might have heard of, the shale revolution, no misnomer, no overstatement, it is an undeniable fact. We're being watched and copied all over the world by those who are trying to replicate our secret sauce, and we've become so efficient at drilling these wells that the Marcellus and Utica shales in this region, they stand as a low-cost sources of energy, not just for the country, but perhaps the world. The people in our industry, they're young, they're highly skilled, they're driven, and they're extremely proud. None of them would be here if it were not for the shale revolution. The industry really is the greatest thing since, and really the only true answer to the rise and demise of our regional manufacturing base. Now, once it's produced, all that natural gas needs to be utilized. So you're seeing a complete recapitalization of our regional power grid that's occurring before our very eyes. What was largely a coal and nuclear-based power grid, it's now natural gas-based. That lowers the cost of, it increases the reliability, and it reduces the emissions of electricity. And when you do those types of things to electricity, the fundamental input of so many manufacturing endeavors, other things are sure to happen, and happening they are. Shell's building a multi-billion-dollar facility in this region. It's going to establish a new petrochemical industry. Why did they build it? Proximity to low-cost and affordable feedstocks, that drives manufacturing base. Now, other regions of the country, they see what we're doing with natural gas, and they're retooling their economies accordingly. So major interstate pipelines are being constructed to ship the natural gas we produce here to run the economies of the Southeast, the Upper Midwest, and Canada. And it doesn't end at our shores. We've gone global. When you look at places like Poland and Spain and Japan and India, they are using our natural gas to counter leverage from those who aren't afraid to use energy as a weapon, such as Russia. Today, Appalachian shales, they represent as big of a strategic deterrent and lever against our ideological enemies and rivals as an aircraft carrier fleet does or as foreign aid. So my friends in academia, and I assure you I do have some friends in academia, they love to quantify the indirect impacts of activities like natural gas in the form of conceptual externalities. Good concept, the problem is oftentimes it's used in a biased way where they're only looking at negative or perceived negative impacts of something like natural gas development. What if we applied that concept to the positive benefits? What's it worth to have a strategic lever like Appalachian shale for European countries to protect themselves from the Russian bear? What's it worth to bring millions out of abject poverty in Africa or Asia because they get electrification sooner and cheaper and more reliably? What's it worth to have a better balance of trade due to energy exports, and what's it worth to have a regional and national economy that's growing where people work and deficits shrink? There aren't enough digits in your calculator to express that value. So Rand, of course, is often associated with the dollar sign as emblematic of what she stood for. Playing off of that, I think this region would be well served to think of the carbon atom or the carbon dioxide molecule as our emblem. And we should wear it, carry it, display it with extreme pride. So with all of these positive things going for Cleveland and Appalachia and the country and the world, why am I standing here today looking to make an indictment? I'm going to pull another quote from Rand from the mid-40s, which is, have you ever heard of a battle won by appeasement? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that the second-hander is alive and well today. All those wonderful creators and individuals and capitalists in the natural gas industry, they're engaged in hand-to-hand combat on a daily basis with an army of second-handers whose sole aim is to drain the achiever of his or her earned wealth. And I'm going to provide 3 current tangible examples of how the second-hander is waging that war against those creators and in the natural gas industry and concurrently. But before I do that, I want to emphasize 3 things at the outset. First, I am not against strong environmental performance. Quite the contrary, I equate it to strong financial performance. They correlate, at least they do in my industry. Second, I am not against differentiation in capital markets or competitive industries. You can find an accurate and objective way to rank and assess. You should do so as an investor. And third, I am not anti-religion. I'm Catholic. But what I am against and what I am anti is the misuse or weaponization of vague concepts to attack a creator, an individual, or an achiever. I'm allergic to the gross distortion of data, fact, and reason, and that's what the second-hander is doing when it comes to the 3 topics I'm going to discuss, which are sustainability, ESG, or environmental social governance investing, and last but not least, Catholic doctrine under Pope Francis. Let's start with sustainability. Rand in 1947, most dangerous thing in the world is a definition which is not specific, not objective, but open to arbitrary interpretation of anyone who wishes to use it. It's almost as if she's had a crystal ball when she wrote that when it comes to a popular tagline today that everyone in the room has heard of, which is sustainability. Superficially pleasant at its core, however, abused, weaponized concept, which started in academia and it's spread to public companies in corporate America. You pick up any business magazine, annual report, strategic plan, inevitably you come to the point where the word sustainability arises. The topic of sustainability, it plays as prominent of a role in those communication documents as terms like customer, diversity, and people do. But what is sustainability exactly? Well, the truth is, no one really knows. You can't measure it. It's a state of mind. It's a vague concept that when applied broadly, it envelops everything around it. Even definitions developed by the self-described experts, it leaves the reader confused as to what sustainability and sustainable development are. So if we take the United Nations definition, which is the most widely quoted definition out there, their view of it is, quote, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, unquote. Now, what does that mean? Who decides the needs of the present? What constitutes compromising? Is the term future generations, is that referring to our kids, our grandkids, or people 1,000 years from now? And how are we supposed to figure out the needs of those future generations and what tools and technologies they might have at their disposal to address them? The UN definition of sustainable development, it compactly fits within a single sentence, and it sounds really good. But when you study it for 30 seconds, you realize sustainable development defies definition. And that is by cold, calculating design. The thought police spread across academia and the government bureaucracy and the left, they invented the religion of sustainability. The religion and associated ideology, they're then applied to increase control and dominion over creators. The more vague and general the religious fundamentals are, the more those concepts can be customized by the high priests to exert tailored influence over others on a case-by-case, as-needed basis. Religious extremism and sustainability, they're authoritarian in nature. They impose beliefs and decision-making from the caliphate and from the university upon the worshipers, the students, and the consumers. Both are totalitarian, not allowing the individual to make choices for themselves and instead dictating how things are going to be. Sustainability, it's become the ultimate liberal art and the official religion of higher education. That's why a couple of years ago, Yale was rolling out their sustainable strategic plan, and during that rollout, the president of Yale had the moxie to tell students, and I'm using his words, to fake it till you make it, in order to present an image and a mirage of sustainability behaviors. That's right, the president of Yale publicly encouraging students to mislead and lie their way through sustainability theater. Emory University down in Atlanta, not much better. They're asking students to study in populated areas at night to conserve electricity and to take time for what they're calling stillness each week, whatever that means. UVA, incoming students cite a pledge, and the pledge is, quote, "I pledge to consider the social, economic, and environmental impacts of my habits and to explore ways to live more sustainably during my time here at UVA and beyond," unquote. Students are then asked to repeat that pledge at graduation. In many ways, our Orwellian future is now. Now, the concept or the religion of sustainability has spurred another concept I'd like to discuss, which is ESG, or environmental social governance investing. And the quote from Rand that I think is applicable to this topic is that collectivists never work through direct propaganda, it's groundwork laying. So the second-hander has figured out an effective way to constrict the financing of public company creator endeavors through a superficially benign yet diabolical groundwork that is referenced there. And they do that through what's this off-cited ESG investment theory. In ESG investing, it's present whenever you hear terms like doing well by doing good, or when you hear impact investing, or where you hear ethical investing. And worldwide, mutual funds and ETFs that are associated with ESG investing, they're hovering around $1 trillion in assets right now. Media, environmental groups, academia, they love ESG funds. To me, that's a sure tip-off to the danger that they pose. That's just my opinion. Wall Street's more than happy to jump on the ESG bandwagon because it means higher fees and commissions, and they've been creating new ESG funds and products at a dizzying rate. Now, the premise of ESG investing is incredibly illogical. You exclude an investment class from consideration in a portfolio because of a vague or purely subjective set of criteria. That's going to hurt returns, that's going to increase risk, or sometimes both. And confusion, of course, is added to the mix since what's deemed ethical, that's in the eye of the beholder. Proponents of ESG investing claim that one can objectively and quantitatively evaluate companies on ESG performance, but that claim is false. What is socially worthy or morally just business, it can't be boiled down to a universal formula when the ethics are being applied ideologically, as they are in the case of ESG investing, and not scientifically. That's why some ESG funds, they've got Tesla as the top-rated ESG car company, and other ESG funds rank Tesla at the bottom of the industry. Savvy investors, they don't need a gimmick to tell them what the Darwinian market already tells them. Companies who can't operate in a safe, environmentally sound manner, they're going to be run out of business in a short period of time due to decreased productivity and increased costs. The best example I can give you is the here and now of a utility out in California, Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E. I don't know how many of you have been following that, but it really does exemplify the stark contrast between investing reality and ESG fantasy. First, let's talk about the fantasy. For years, that California utility racked up ESG accolades from self-proclaimed governance experts. You look at Sustainalytics, that firm deemed PG&E an ESG outperformer. Corporate Responsibility Magazine ranked PG&E as the top utility in the nation when it came to ESG performance. And Newsweek's Green Rankings also placed PG&E at the top of the utility heap. PG&E, in many ways, was the belle of the ESG ball. Then last year and the year prior, of course, 17 and 18, wildfires raged across California, and it was determined that over 1,500 of those fires, several of them catastrophic, were caused by PG&E poor maintenance practices, deferred safety upgrades, slow responsiveness, and obsolete equipment. Before you knew it, the utility was facing tens of billions of dollars in liability, and then last year, PG&E filed for bankruptcy, earlier this year actually, which brought home the reality of investors being wiped out, despite all those shiny yet hollow ESG accolades. That wasn't exactly the ESG dharma that PG&E promised to naive investors and fund managers. So the fund manager who's following flawed ESG doctrine, making their job more difficult, at least if the job is defined in the traditional legal sense of delivering returns and lowering risk for investors and for beneficiaries. An analogy would be the manager of a baseball team, let's say the Cleveland Indians, who suddenly decided that they weren't going to play, start, draft, or recruit any players of a certain ethnic or religious makeup because they didn't deem them worthy. Not only would that result in moral outrage due to its inherent discrimination, it would also result in the baseball team having a less than optimal roster, and that wouldn't bode well for its performance. Common sense tells you that limiting a portfolio to high-fee investment options of subjectively deemed ESG-worthy companies, that is not going to keep pace with the performance of a lower-cost portfolio without such constraints. Accommodating a fact-bending ideology instead of a fact-based one that is looking to drive investment behavior and drive capital allocation, that is not going to change reality. So here's to hoping that your pension fund manager, your 401k manager, or your mutual fund manager, they're staying true to the genuine fiduciary duty and not playing the role basically of a pawn in the game of a second-hander. My third and final topic that I'd like to talk about before concluding speaks to what some call the Bishop of Rome, but most of us refer to that individual as the Pope. And the quote from the early 60s from Rand that's applicable in this instance is that it is morally evil to choose as one's full-time profession any activity which is not supported by trading but consists of almsgiving. So these ideological concepts like sustainability and ESG investing, they're being projected by the second-handers, and they enjoy the support of a spectrum of celebrities. I'd like to highlight how one of the biggest celebrities on the planet, Pope Francis, plays a leading role in persecuting achievers, the individual, capitalism, and free enterprise. And the linchpin, in many ways, of the Pope's attacks centers on environmentalism and, in particular, climate change. Apparently, the Vatican is no glass house because Francis, he leaves no stones unturned in his 2015 encyclical on the environment. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but if you did, it's a rambling document. It's a stark, blunt manifesto well beyond the traditional established bounds of competence and expertise dealing with faith and morals. Yet the encyclical's veneer itself, it's actually thin, sweet wrappings of St. Francis of Assisi walking among an unspoiled landscape with his wildlife friends. Francis is no fan of technology and science. Using his words from the encyclical, quote, "Rather than a problem to be solved, the world is a joyful mystery to be contemplated with gladness and praise." And he continues, "It cannot be maintained that empirical science provides a complete explanation of life," unquote. Francis would be happier to see mankind revert back to the Dark Ages, where things were much more dismal, life was much more brutal, but where the church enjoyed much more control over the flock. The Pope's disdain for advancement, perhaps that's not surprising when you consider the Catholic Church has a bad record of suppressing scientific brilliance. We're all familiar with Galileo, who wasted under house arrest because of his audacity to put forth the idea of the earth revolving around a sun. In many ways, it feels like history is repeating itself, and the church is extending its long history of scientific denial as Francis ignores tremendous, incalculable benefits that technology continues to bestow on all of us. So when Columbus and Einstein and Edison and Curie and Da Vinci, when they encountered their joyful mysteries, they did not settle for that gladness and praise that we just heard about, and we should be thankful that they didn't. Pope Francis also doesn't place much stock in recent breathtaking developments of science and technology, and he feels that we're coming off of, quote, "a period of irrational confidence and progress in human abilities," end quote. The past few decades have delivered more technological advancement across a wider swath of the world that benefited more people, including millions and millions of Catholics, than the prior 2 centuries combined. Life expectancies are longer, infant mortality rate is lower, and education is wider than ever before, all because of technology, human ability, and the application of both across the globe. In the form of what? In the form of fossil fuels, finance, chemicals, GMOs, capital markets, and on and on. Confidence in man's ability is not irrational, but entirely rational. Last year, the Vatican held a climate change conference, and with the leaders of some big oil companies in attendance, the Pope criticized the continued search for fossil fuels, along with the ongoing extraction and utilization of them. And really what the Pope is doing is presenting a fool's choice. On one side, I guess we have the continued utilization of fossil fuels and pending global climate catastrophe. And on the other side, we've got the adoption of renewable energy across the board using green financing. Both are fantasy, both ignore reality. And all you have to do is look at data. If you look at the past 150 years, if you go back to the 1870s, CO2 was somewhere just under 300 parts per million in the atmosphere. Global famine deaths were over 1,400 deaths per 100,000 people. If you fast forward to the 1940s, and this is despite World War II raging across the planet, carbon dioxide, it went above 300 parts per million, so went up a bit. Global famine deaths went from that over 1,400 per 100,000 people to 785 deaths per 100,000 people. Current decade, CO2 is over 400 parts per million. CO2 is up. Famine deaths across the globe, three people per 100,000 people. And from the 40s till today, population's tripled, GDP per capita has quadrupled. We don't need these data to prove beyond a doubt that an increased level of affordable and reliable electrification and access to fossil fuels in society is inherently good. Francis is really also jumping into the embrace of a seriously flawed concept that we see in other areas and in other avenues as well, and that is the concept of scientific consensus. Specifically, he states, a, quote, very solid scientific consensus indicates that we're presently witnessing a disturbing warming of the climate system, end quote. Now, this concept of scientific consensus, you see it quite a bit. What exactly constitutes a very solid consensus? Is that the most votes? Is that greater than 50% of the votes? Is that 90+% of the votes, a supermajority? And who gets to express an opinion or cast a vote? Is it everybody or just subject matter experts? And who gets to decide which individual is an expert and meets the criteria of expert? The term very solid consensus and scientific consensus, they're subjective, they're opaque, they're undefinable. Scientific consensus is used not to find truth, but instead to shape truth and to bend truth. Science is about challenging and destroying the consensus. When Einstein developed his theory of relativity, he didn't worry that all the other physicists would disagree with him. When Columbus sailed to the New World, he didn't listen to the 50+% of explorers who said that the world was flat. When truth loses to the majority, science and society are sure to suffer. Another quote from the Pope's encyclical that I found very interesting, quote, to ensure economic freedom from which all can effectively benefit, restraints occasionally have to be imposed on those possessing greater resources and financial power, end quote. Well, I guess it's time for the workers of the world to unite. Pope Francis, he jumps headfirst into socialist and communist ideology. That's the same ideology boasting a history of persecuting and murdering Catholic priests, nuns, and faithful for decades and decades and decades. The Pope's encyclical is back to the future in some ways by resurrecting, really, when you look at it in total, the despised tool of indulgences. The Catholic Church utilized indulgences to allow Catholics to absolve their sins by either performing good acts or by making donations to the church. Absolving of sins meant the avoidance of punishment after death. So if you could pay the fee, you could save yourself anguish. It was sort of an institutionalized get-out-of-hell-free card. Now, the poor light cast by the heavy use of indulgences, that cloaked the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages up to and really was the catalyst in many ways for Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517. Pope Francis is resurrecting the practice of selling indulgences, and he's marketing it with a shiny and sleek wrapping of climate change. Today, the original sin is being born in a developed Western country with a high standard of living. Today, the sin is enjoying energy and the quality of life benefits that it delivers. Today, the indulgence to pay for these sins comes in both good acts and monetary options. Now, the good acts options, they include making a regular denouncement of fossil fuels, the divestment march, self-imposition of energy efficiency mandates, and CO2 caps. Good acts indulgences, they're important because they program the rhetoric into the minds of the flock and into the power grids of the diocese. These good acts indulgences, however, they are only a pathway to the Pope's preferred option of monetary indulgences because you see cash is indeed king. Monetary indulgences, they span the local and personal level up to the national and global level. The price can be as small as a few $100s per year for a U.S. citizen through higher electric and gas bills, to as much as hundreds of billions of dollars a year for a nation through carbon taxes and transfer payments between developed and undeveloped nations that you see espoused under various climate agreements. Climate change doctrine, it offers a turbocharged scope and scale of indulgences never imagined by Francis's predecessors through centuries of Vatican rule. So for a pope who expresses great disdain for capitalism and free enterprise markets, Francis is awfully comfortable pushing for a modern-day global market of indulgences measured in trillions of dollars. The Catholic faith gets manipulated by Francis to create a new sin of fossil fuel energy use, manufacture a harm to God and others in the form of climate change, and press for the payment of indulgences by individuals and nations in the developed world. Now, there's many other examples we could have discussed with our time this afternoon, but I wanted to conclude my comments just talking about the biggest second-hander of all, and it really goes to the quote going back to the mid-1930s that you see on the screen. Either we believe that the state exists to serve the individual, or the individual exists to serve the state. Faceless bureaucrats that answer to no one enjoy unfettered ability to write and interpret law that impacts the individual and achiever in countless ways. When the government directly controls a large enough portion of the total economy, it reaches a critical mass whereby it indirectly controls the entire economy. Those who achieve are forced to fit into the economic slots that the deep state prescribes. If the bureaucracy controls the economy, it also controls societal thought, and the opposite or vice versa is also true. It was E.H. Carr who once stated, quote, "It's significant that the nationalization of thought has proceeded everywhere pari passu with the nationalization of industry," unquote. Of course, while all this is going on, the bureaucracy is always going to market this effort as being in what? Being in the public interest, right? For the public good. So where have the federal government, bureaucracy, and other organizations, where have they focused their efforts and attention on over the past decade? Well, what have been the landmark laws, regulations, or treaties the government has created over that time? Three biggest splashes of the state over the past decade have been Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and the Paris Accord. First looks to have the government take over healthcare. The second creates a bureaucratic stranglehold over banking and finance. And the last one seeks to allow the global bureaucracy to control the energy industry. Efforts to take control of the U.S. economy, I think we all know they experienced a step up in intensity earlier this year with the Green New Deal. And by the way, as we speak, the next moves are being made on the tech sector and social media under the banners of privacy and antitrust. So much for the appeasement strategy, Silicon Valley. How's that working out for you? The second-hander, ladies and gentlemen, it's a movement, it's a coordinated effort, it spans many horizons, and it plays the long game over years. It starts with messaging across media, academic institutions. It indoctrinates very patiently. Government collaborates, it funds, it stacks the deck, and it enables the second-hander to grow and tighten his grip on us daily. Second-hander has become a very powerful, worthy, cunning adversary to our free enterprise and individualistic way of life. Please do not underestimate him. Thank you.
Could you comment at all on what impact, if any, you've observed Alex Epstein's work to have on this industry?
Any impact I've observed on?
The energy industry.
Of?
Alex Epstein.
Oh, yeah, Alex in his book. So this is, I think, a good example of some of the opportunities and some of the challenges to try to counter the messaging and some of the things that we're seeing with respect to the topics that we spoke about. Alex publishes The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels, and on the good side of things, or the exciting side of things, many in the energy industry took to that almost immediately. The book has been widely distributed, read. He's given numerous talks across different industry groups and whatnot. And that's the type of thing that you would want to see when something of that importance comes out to make the statement that it did. The challenging side of it, though, however, is that our industry, and I'm sure there's other industries that are pretty much in the same situation that the energy industry finds itself in, the norm is to not speak up. The norm is to remain silent, perhaps even in some instances appease, and to hope that through that avoidance or not speaking up or appeasement, that you're left alone. And I think as time marches on, my hope is that the realization comes to more throughout the industry that is a futile hope, a futile strategy. I think statements such as Alex Epstein help with that and help catalyze that, but we need to see much more of that much sooner, not just, again, I'm sure within the energy industry, but throughout other industries as well in similar situations.
From a marketing point of view, every company that I do work for today is using the green messaging not because of the government directly, but because consumers are demanding it. So can you talk a little bit about the kind of the moral cowardice that's involved in refusing to help educate consumers about what's really going on?
Yes, the branding, as I said at the end, has been very efficient with respect to playing the long game. We didn't get here overnight. This has been a work in progress for decades. And many failures or many missteps by the opposition, but overall keeping their focus on the strategic long game has paid dividends to today. To your point, it's just part and parcel to everything that you see, whether it's education or whether it's industry and marketing products or anything in between. I think there's been two sides to that effort. One has been what you would call the positive reinforcement. It's the right thing to do. You should be willing to pay more for this as a consumer. And then if you're a producer of something, the customer will pay more for that, or they will differentiate. But there's also been a very effective negative side of that, which is if you don't do those things, if you don't market those things, if you don't say those things, you're facing significant backlash across many different avenues. It's not just going to be things like a depressed demand from a customer perspective. It could be for public companies through shareholder activism. It could be with respect to financing sources, where they will go to the banks that finance these industries or these companies and try to force change and differentiation there. It will be things like the investor base, as we spoke about with ESG investing. So you're basically faced in a world where you can go one path, whether you think it's a relevant strategy or a relevant statement or not, and at a minimum be left alone, or maybe optimally be applauded and see some perceived or touted benefits, whether they're true or not, and hope that they come to roost. And on the other hand, you could maybe take an approach where, no, I'm going to speak to the facts, and I'm going to basically market my product with the issues that are relevant and ignore those that are not relevant. And you're facing not just an uphill battle, you're facing outright opposition that you need to be prepared for. So it's been, as I said, there's been a reinforcement on the positive side and there's been a reinforcement on the negative side, and that negative side has been very effective.
You mentioned that other countries are trying to emulate what you're doing in this industry. Which countries are doing that, and are they facing more opposition to the shale oil revolution than we are in this country, and are they making any progress in that?
Yeah, so the countries that are doing and trying to study and replicate what's going on with respect to natural gas and shale typically fall into really two baskets. The first basket are countries who understand that right now energy is a crucial strategic foundation of basically their strategic positioning geopolitically. An example would be Poland with Russia. So the Poles know that if the Russians aren't happy with them in the middle of winter, it's not out of the realm to expect that valve on the gas line is going to be shut off. They also have a long history understanding that they're sort of in a bad neighborhood with respect to their location. So developing their indigenous shale industry is of tremendous interest to them. That's also why they're a big importer of liquefied natural gas from the United States. Another country would be someone like India or Japan. Japan having basically no energy resources, but trying to find ways actually to develop natural gas in other nations that they could import it from a diversity perspective. And the second bucket of nations would be ones that view shale gas as the future, and they want to develop that to either increase their stranglehold strategically on energy or to build one. Those nations, of course, would be nations like Russia. OPEC, of course, is watching shale gas development quite closely because the shale revolution basically has broken OPEC in many ways. They're looking to reestablish that. And then, of course, China.
Thanks.
The withdrawal from the Paris Accord, how impactful do you think that is going to be in the future?
Well, the Paris Accord from the outset was flawed on many fronts, and ideologically, I think it got recognized at some point, at least by some decision makers, as to what it is and what it wasn't. The good news is, of course, we've withdrawn from it. The bad news is that can change in a short period of time. I suspect that we will see variations of that Paris Accord in some way, shape, or form back in the not too distant future. And I suspect we will see more and more of those types of initiatives, whether it's on a state level, you see states doing this individually, whether it's on a national level, or frankly on an international level. So it's not going away. I think it was a great decision, of course, but to think that it's been decided and done with and now we can move on, that's not the case.
Hi. So as CEO of CNX, do you encounter people within your own ranks who have sympathies for this concept of sustainability? Do you have any experiences? Can you share your experiences with how you deal with these people, or can you share some advice for people in the industry as well who want to counter this narrative?
Yeah, the employee base within our company, at least speaking to what I know best, they are very much, I think, proud on board with what we do for a living. They view it as a noble endeavor. They're proud to do that, and they want the view of that to be shared among all those who benefit from that activity across society. With respect to sustainability, one of the things we debate quite a bit within the company and beyond is that sustainability might actually be a useful concept. It's how you define it. And sustainability is defined, say, by the United Nations. That is not a good definition. But if you want to look at how something like natural gas development and all the downstream impacts of it can help a region or a state or a nation thrive, and you can think about employment and education opportunities and investment and innovation that spurs from that, that may be a good definition of sustainability if you can quantify those with tangible, measurable metrics.
Regarding the idea that a lot of these companies are falling in with this idea that they have to market themselves as being green, how is your company handling that, and what specifically is the mission statement you put forth to your shareholders?
So one of the things we're working on right now as we speak, it's a timely question, is our corporate responsibility report. And what we've done through the last couple of years is we've made a very conscious effort to go straight to measurable, tangible metrics that matter. So, the UN definition of sustainability and talking about all kinds of sweet wrappings of how great the company is or how good we are with respect to the region we operate within. No, we go to, here's what we're doing with respect to safety performance. Here's the metrics that we measure off of that. Here's how we did this year versus last year versus prior years. Here's how we measure and consider the important metrics for environmental performance. Here's why they translate to good financial performance, that as a shareholder or as an owner, you're going to want to know about these things. And here's what we're doing with respect to that other component I talked about with respect to job growth, job creation, things like that with respect to investment and innovation within the region that we operate within. So we've taken that sort of sleek tool that you see now everywhere, the corporate responsibility type report, and now we've basically tailored it to speak to very measurable, very specific metrics that we think correlate to what our margins are, to what our rate of returns are, and to frankly what our net income and our value is as a company. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. To help keep content like this free, consider supporting ARI by becoming a member at aynrand.org/membership.